I need to ask one question because a large part of the narrative around the Baltic states is that there's terrible Russophobia there. How true is this? There must be some Russophobia, but is it of any important scale?
It's very complicated issue because from the one side, Russia put this narrative of Russophobia, that the Baltic states and other countries of Central Eastern Europe are Russophobic. But Russia took all of the political decisions, which limits the Russian influence in the region as a Russophobia.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Furnival. You are watching or listening to an OSW interview. Today I'll be talking to Bartosz Chmielewski, an expert from OSW's Germany and Northern Europe department. We'll be discussing how the Baltic states reacted to Russia's war in Ukraine. Today we're going to talk about the three Baltic states. This is Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. How different are these three countries to each other?
Yeah, there is difference because, first of all, this is the three different countries. There's some similarities between them. The common history in the 20th century, when we look on the history of these states, they emerge in the same time, like after the First World War, they became independent. Then they have 20 years of independence. After that, they became part of Soviet Union for next 45, 50 years, and they regained their independence in the early 90s, in the 1991, and this is the most thing which is common for these states. When we look to the differences, first of all, this is the languages. Latvians and Lithuanians use the same family languages. This is the Baltic languages, and Estonians use the Ugro-Finnic language. The Estonian language is more similar to Finnish than to Latvian or Lithuanian.
And the difference is large.
The difference is large. There's no same words. There's no similar sentences. This is completely different group. In some cases, in Latvian and Lithuanian, there's words which are similar. Sometimes they are false friends, but on the basic level, sometimes these people can understand each other because it's the same group. In the case of Estonian, there's a possibility that some of Estonians can understand Finnish language, but this is because of matter that in some of Estonian schools are Finnish language, and also when we start to look into more important things as a policy of the state, as a society of the states, there is more differences. We can start from the societies. First of all, the Lithuanian is a state where the majority are Lithuanians, and they are dominate in the society. But in the Estonian case and Latvian case, we have a situation when in these countries also lives not only Estonian speakers or Latvian speakers, but there are big group of ethnic minorities. Mm-hmm. They are mostly Russian speakers arrived to the States during the Soviet times. And this wave of immigration was artificially made by Moscow, by Soviet Union. These two states these two parts of Soviet Union at this time was quite good developed. These two states were quite well industrialized, and people from other parts of Soviet Union came there to have a good job, to live in nice conditions, and also in Latvian case they were many of military bases made by Moscow. Lithuanians are in Lithuania. There is no so much minorities, and most of them are people who are living there longer than last 100 years. The biggest group of non-Lithuanians living in Lithuania are Poles, and then Russians and Belarusians. But when we look at the numbers,
Because Lithuania also borders Belarus.
yes, there's also border Belarus, and Latvia also border Belarus, and this is the difference when we look from the societal point of view. And also when we start to look on the politics of the states, on foreign politics, on internal politics, on economics, there are differences. For example, Estonia positioned themselves and tried to show as a country of New Nordic, of as a part of the Northern Europe, and this kind of public diplomacy of Estonia, and also part of identity of Estonians to be a part of Northern Europe. And there is no this kind of identity in Latvia or Lithuania.
So the gateway to this is through Finland for Estonia.
Yes, through Finland, but also on historical connections with Sweden, and also there were during the Soviet times big emigration from Estonia to Sweden, the big diaspora, Estonian diaspora in Sweden. On the economic level, Estonia is the most liberal state in terms of neoliberal economy, and I would say the most independent from the Russian factor. Latvia, for example, for the last 30 years tried to be a country on the edge, connecting West and the East. Lithuania, in this terms, is more agricultural country than these two northern neighbors, which was or were more industrialized.
Okay.
And this is the basic differences between these three states.
Okay, so plenty in common, especially historically, but there are important differences. As we move on to looking at the war that Russia launched against Ukraine, it seems that these three states have a united front against Russia. Is this the case?
When we look on the policy of the three states from afar, we can say that there is one front, because Baltic states were the first countries which openly say that they help Ukraine with weapons just after the February of 22. Also, they support the civil society in the Ukraine. The three countries position themselves as the biggest supporters of Ukraine. But when we look further or deeper, we can see the differences between these countries, these policies, and the tactic of the leaders, political tactic of the leaders. For example, Estonia is trying to push new ideas for Ukraine on the European level, and it's quite successful. For example, the idea of common procurement of ammunition for Ukraine was the Estonian idea. When we look on the Lithuanian case, we see the strong support from the government, but also strong support from the civil society, which is organizing the public fundraisings. For example, they bought the UAV for Ukraine for the money gathered by the society. When we look to the Latvian case, we see that this Latvian government is more pragmatic, and it's not so loud on the European arena. But also the state and society support Ukraine by military means and also humanitarian means. Um, the third thing is immigrants or refugees from Ukraine. And in these three cases, also the governments have different policy towards these people who arrive from the Ukraine last year, and also there's different amount of people who decide to arrive to these countries. For example, the Estonia have the most difficult situation because during the last year came to this country around 50,000 of people. And
Where are they arriving from? Because Estonia is the furthest from Ukraine.
yes, but that was the very important way of arriving people to European Union, because people who were living under the Russian occupation, they were no possibility to go to Europe on the Polish corridor, I would say. They were mostly traveling around all the Russia to the north and then crossing the border point in Estonia, in Narva, between the Russia and Estonia. And that was one of the important gateways for the Ukrainian refugees from the occupied territories. That's why there was so many refugees in the small Estonia, because maybe for our listeners this number is not so big, but for Estonians and for Estonia, who have 1,300,000 of inhabitants, these numbers are very big. And according to last statistical data, the around 30,000 stay in the country, which means that the number of inhabitants of the country grow around 2.5%. It's quite big. There were less refugees in in Latvia and Lithuania according to the percents, but the biggest number of refugees were in natural numbers. The biggest number of refugees was in Lithuania. And this is the biggest differences in this terms of Baltic aid to Ukraine, Baltic policy towards the Russia and towards the war. Because if we look on this dimension of Russia policy of the Baltic states, now it's almost similar. All of these countries trying to push on the European agenda that idea that Russia is a terrorist state, that we need to cut off ties with Russia, we need to put more sanctions on Russia, and help Ukraine as much we can as a Europeans. And these three countries stand in one front, not only together but also with other states of CE, of Central Eastern Europe, for example, like Poland. And the main goal of this policy is pushing other European countries, which is maybe not so affected by a war, to convince them that this war is also dangerous for countries like Spain or Portugal, which are not have a common border with Russia, which are far from the Ukraine, but to convince them that this also the common war of our war of all Europeans, and this is the common thing what these countries are doing together.
Okay, there's one or two of those points I'd like to come back to, but for the moment, could I ask how this is coordinated? Because they are three different states with three different governments. They can't simply be so like-minded. Is there a lot of multilateral talks between the leaders?
Yeah, when we take the last year and trying to follow the meetings of the presidents or prime minister of these countries, they have a place very often. And also, I would say, and that these politicians, the elites of these countries, are like-minded because they have the same historical experience of being of part of Soviet Union or and earlier of Tsarist Russia, and this is what made these countries like-minded. The same experience, the same mentality in some ways, but for sure the same stance toward the security issues and danger from their eastern neighbor. But yes, thus leaders meet very often. They are trying to coordinate the common politics, also trying to gather the attention of other politicians from other countries, and trying to make a kind of a tactical alliance for the Ukrainian issues.
Would you say they have a loud voice, the Baltic states?
Yes, especially Estonia and a little bit less Lithuania. The Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, she's very popular in the global press, in the European press. This press depicts her as a new leader, as a new Iron Lady, which is not true, to be honest. But yeah, she and her stance towards the Russia, her good English, her contacts among the European politicians make that she's very loud, and her voice is heard in the, for example, European Union. Also, the foreign minister of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, trying to make the similar moves. But if I can compare them, I would say that Estonia and Kaja Kallas, she's louder than her Baltic colleagues, and I would say that she's the first among the Baltic states leaders now. And this is the great example that, like, Estonia forced this idea of common procurement. They also Estonia was the first country who not only public say that the Estonia will send the weapons to Ukraine, but also convinced the Western European countries which were not so eager to send these weapons. This is the best case of Estonians cannons or howitzers, which Estonia wanted to share it with Ukraine, but Estonia needed to have the permission from Finland and Germany, because these weapons were bought in the past from these two countries, and they needed to give a permission for Estonia. And in this kind of politics, the Tallinn tried to push the limits of or even not political limits, but mental limits of European politicians.
And in this case, rather successfully.
Yes, and we can say that this Estonian policy is most successful from the three Baltic states.
So you mentioned Kaja Kallas's popularity outside of Estonia, but she just won re-election recently, and also Lithuania have had elections since the war in Ukraine was escalated by Russia.
Also, Latvia had elections last autumn, and they will have presidential elections next few weeks.
Is the war a factor in these elections?
Yes, in the terms of Estonian elections, which were last spring, and Latvian elections, which were last autumn, the war have a great impact. when we talk about the Estonian elections, the topic of national security and topic of Ukraine-Russian war was the main topic of the elections and discussion between the parties. And because of that, because the Kaja Kallas was positioned herself as the good leader, as a leader for war times, she gathered more than 30% of votes. Estonian people believe her and wanted her to continue her effort for the next term. But after the elections, the real word came, as I can say, and Estonia have economical problems now, fiscal problems made by war and the war effects on the Estonian economy. And Kaja Kallas made some unpopular decisions, and her support in the society last 2 months fall down from 30 to even 23, 24% of voters, of Estonians. This is the big problem for her and a big challenge for this government, because it's tried to introduce unpopular reforms which not were mentioned during the campaign. And this is the Estonian case, but in Latvian case, the story is maybe a little bit positive, because the war changed the Latvian political landscape, and war, I would say, move one party, one of the biggest Latvian parties from the political scene, from the political system. That was the party called Harmony, Saskaņa Latvian, which was the party of local Russian speakers, of Russian-speaking Latvians, or Russians, or members of the national minorities. And for the last 10 years, this party wins all the elections, but never ruled. The other parties, like center-right parties, try to block on this party and put out from the governing by surrounding it by a so-called sanitary cordon. This party had a very scale of gray opinion on the war. Like, from the one side, they trying to condemn Russia, but from other side, they don't do it as much as the other parties do, and their supporters were disappointed because
their supporters, their electorate is probably the ethnic Russians.
Not only, but also part of ethnic Latvians. But this part of society which was pro-Ukraine was disappointed by this not so strong stance, and people who were more believed to Russian narrations were disappointed because the party trying to support Ukraine. And this is the major thing for the Latvian politics.
So in this sense, Putin's war in Ukraine has weakened the Russian influence in Latvia.
Yes, this is the one thing, but also in the parliament we have the real pro-Russian strong party, new party, which have very small support, but they came to the parliament last elections, and but it's like the landscape was completely changed. There is no anymore the big party elected by the minorities, and this is the major change for the society.
I need to ask one question, because a large part of the narrative around the Baltic states is that there's terrible Russophobia there. How true is this? There must be some Russophobia, but is it of any important scale?
It's a very complicated issue, because from the one side, Russia put this narrative of Russophobia, that the Baltic states and other countries of Central Eastern Europe are Russophobic. But Russia took all of the political decisions, who were against it, or political decision which limits the Russian influence in the region, as a Russophobia. And in these terms, we can't say that there is a Russophobia in the Baltic states. But in the other dimension, we can say that the part of societies of Latvian, Estonian, and Lithuanian society is prejudiced towards Russia because of history, because of experience, because of policy of the Soviet Union, which trying to Russify the region, which put people in the jail because of their opinions and their decisions. And in these terms, we can say there is some kind of prejudice against Russians and against towards Russia as a state. But it's not in these terms are Russians trying to depict what is Russophobia. And if we talk about the future elections, like elections in Lithuania, parliamentary elections in the next couple of months, this Russian issue, the security issue, will also be important, and this is the one of the things discussed by the society.
Okay, I'd like to take a step back to the Ukrainian refugees, particularly focusing on Estonia, because you said there's very many Ukrainians going to Estonia. And this is very dynamic linguistic mix. These Ukrainians going to Estonia, I would guess, would have to communicate with the local people in Russian.
Yes, this is the easiest way. And also this same situation in Latvia and in some parts of Lithuania. People are able to, in this everyday life, communicate in Russian, but it's a short-term solution. People who wanted to stay in these countries, they need to learn the state language, because there is only one official state language in these countries, like Estonian in Estonia, Latvian in Latvia, Lithuanian in Lithuania. And if they plan to stay longer in this states, they need to know the language. And there is also the language courses for refugees. The young refugees have an opportunity to, for example, in Estonia, to go to the special schools, immersive schools, when the people are able to learn in, for example, Russian, and also step by step more words, new sentences in state languages. Also in the States, there are some of political decisions made last autumn to make easier for the refugees to become a part of society, to learn the language, to immerse in the society. There is one problem now in Lithuania, because this kind of simplification of law for the refugees will end, because it was only put on the short period of time. And probably if the government wouldn't change their decisions, the refugees will need to learn Lithuanian as fast as they possible, like in few weeks, to have a possibility to get a legal good job. It will be a challenge for people who wanted to stay, because they need to learn the language. And there also will be a group of people who are only wanted to stay in these countries for a couple of months or a couple of time, and they plan to go back when the situation will be more stable. And for these people, this language are not so important issue. But as far as I know, the data show, and the sociological research says that the people who already plan to stay for longer in these countries, they are eager to learn language, and they are trying hard to learn a language, which is for people who really want to, that wouldn't be so difficult, because, as I said, there's a special programs for these people.
Okay. So I have one final question, and it's quite an unusual one because it's a personal one. I am planning this summer to travel to the Baltic states with my family purely for leisure purposes. Is it safe?
Yeah, of course, it's safe. The war happens more than 1,000 kilometers from the border of Baltic states, and also when we think about internal security, like security on the streets, it's completely safe. There is no robberies. There is no murders on the streets.
I was more concerned about a second front opening.
No, I wouldn't afraid of second front, because when we see how much Russia is involved in Ukraine, I would say Russia don't have possibilities now to open the second front, and also the alliance, the NATO alliance, put much effort to strengthen the Baltic states. Last month, last year, we see more troops on the ground, more vehicles, more planes, more political attention on this security of these countries, and more political promises to strengthen military situation of Baltic states. Also, Balts make the procurements of new weapons, reform their armies, and I would say that there is no scenario for a second front this summer or next summer, and people don't need afraid to go there for summer and wake up in the morning and see through the window the tanks and the Russian invasion.
Okay. So I only have to hope for sunshine.
Yeah, you need to hope for sunshine, which is not easy in the Baltic states, because there's always raining in the Balts.
Well, the first truly negative thing you've said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, remember to like and subscribe to get more content from OSW.